We're up to the fourth part of the Becoming a Resilient Scientist series. We're going to talk about self-advocacy and assertiveness. I hope that spring has sprung wherever all of you are. It most certainly has here. It's so much nicer to have some time outside every day and just to feel more hopeful. I know that we're still all caught in pretty tough times. So we're halfway through, and we've talked a lot about what I think is the foundation of all of this, which is how we take care of ourselves. And then we went into real depth on the distorted stories that we tell ourselves. We talked about emotional intelligence and emotional awareness and regulation. And now we're going to move through a bunch of skills that I think are really foundational around assertiveness and self-advocacy, and then around receiving and giving feedback. And then in the last unit, we're going to put all of this together and talk about finding mentors and maximizing the mentoring relationships that you have. And so that's just a little bit of a view of how I see the progression. And so to me, this halfway point is a really important sort of move towards some key skills to thrive in research environments. But we really are at a halfway point. I think it's a good thing to pause for a moment and reflect. And so I'd like you to just sit for, this question for a bit. Given that we're halfway through, we've been working together now for about 9 weeks in thinking about your wellness and stress management strategies. What is one thing you're proud of? And we're going to go ahead and activate the first poll. So I'm going to hold my breath. Here we go. So if you haven't joined Slido already, just open your camera right now, click on the QR code, and you'll get taken there right away. Click on Open Slido in Safari, and you'll be able, once you put in the number, to participate. So just put in a word, whatever word you're proud of, or if it needs to be a few words, that's okay. And so hopefully we'll see some of what you're putting in. I was sort of hoping by now. Lots of people meditating. Balance, mindfulness, self-care, lots of other important things here. Trusting experience, taking time for self, flexibility, physical activity, exercise, openness to therapy, which I think is a real act of courage and act of investment in ourselves. So many nice words here. Taking a breath, seeking help, and whoever passed their qualifying exam, how great is that? Taking breaks, prioritizing myself, thoughtfulness. This makes me smile. We'll let it go for just a minute or two more. Some people are sleeping more. Great, thank you, Anna. So this gives us a sense of the change that we've made. I think the change, noticing what we've done differently and what we've changed is important because it makes it easier to hold on and keep going. So I want to start with a little bit of a journaling exercise. It's going to be pretty quick. If you have paper and a pen, please pick it up. If you don't, you can use your phone. And if not, if you prefer not to actually write, just close your eyes and think through the prompt. So we're just going to write through any blocks. You're not going to turn this in. Doodle, scribble, don't worry about grammar, any language that feels good to you. In thinking about your graduate school, post-bac, postdoc, undergrad experience, wherever you are, is there something holding you back or bothering you enough to be a major distraction? Are there things getting in the way of your success? Is there someone or a few someones that you need to talk with? And is there something you need to change? Whichever one of those grabs you, just start writing, and I'm going to do the same. Hold on to that paper. We might actually come back to that a little bit more. Generally, as we think about things that are holding us back, they fall into two major categories. Some things that we need to work on to change, about and for ourselves. Some things that for example, we might realize that we need to really work on our presentation skills, and we want to find a webinar and find some ways to practice. So things we need to work on for ourselves. But also there's always or often things we need to express to others so we can work together to improve a situation. And I think things really fall into those two categories. Today, we're going to talk a lot about assertiveness and self-advocacy. And so I really want to consider the things that we need to address with others, the things that we need to go and talk to somebody about. So reflecting now on what you've thought about, let's just hear from each other. What's one thing that involves the need to express something to others that you feel might be holding you back? And we'll use the polling software again so that we can hear from each other. And here you can just go ahead and type in a sentence, not a really long string of multiple sentences, just what's sort of at the heart of what's going on. No spring break. So I assume there you need to express to somebody about that. I feel tolerated but not accepted by my PI, how depression and anxiety affects my life, clarifying expectations, insecurity about ability and intellect, admitting to someone that I was abused. There's some heavy, hard things here. My dissertation data is ruined. That's strong words, and I wonder if that story could be reframed and softened. It's disappointing. Lack of self-esteem and being a first-generation student. I don't feel understood. I want to take a different career path and talk to people about it. So all kinds of things about other people's habits, unhealthy habits that are hurting me, people's intolerance about mental health needs, wanting to stand up more, needing more guidance, living with family and not having enough quiet time for self and dissertation. So a lot of things to talk about and express to others. Great, thank you. My hope is that you will sit with the journaling exercise to develop those ideas further. So when it comes to the things that are holding us back, whether it's something we need to change for ourselves or something that we need to express to others so that we can improve a situation, both of them are hard. They're just hard in different ways. Both of them start from the same place, and that is with self-awareness. And we've talked a lot about self-awareness, so I won't go into a whole lot of depth, but I just want to remind you that who we are is a product of our nature and our nurture, right? We're the sum total of all the experiences that we have had, especially early childhood experiences can sort of teach us ways of being, but things later in life, and for scientists, I think being in a lab that was difficult can really alter the way we behave. We learn lessons in every environment that we're in. So nature and nurture. Self-awareness helps us see the maladaptive beliefs and behaviors that we've developed and picked up and are holding on to, with the hope that once we see them, we can replace them with more helpful or more adaptive ones. And there are lots of tools for building self-awareness, journaling and mindfulness, honest conversations with peers, mentors, family, and friends, and support groups and therapy. And many of you mentioned that when you talked about what you're proud of in terms of changing. It was reaching out, getting support. I want to go back to the idea of the resilience follow-up groups, the ones that happen next week. And, some people wrote that it's sort of uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to share with peers. It's uncomfortable to share when there are leaders from your university there. But even when uncomfortable, this kind of conversation can make a big difference. And in fact, I think sometimes to get really deeply into the heart of of where we're at and where we might be stuck and how we'd like to get unstuck, sometimes I think that has to come with discomfort. So remember, we talked a little bit about discomfort tolerance in the last unit, and I would encourage you to take a look back at that if discomfort tolerance is something that pokes at you. I want to transition and start talking about being assertive. So much of what you put into the poll, right, were big, important things, discussions with people who are important. And so I just want to stress that all of us struggle to some degree to appropriately voice our wants, our needs, our concerns, and our opinions. That is universally hard for everyone. Harder for some, less hard for others. We also struggle with when to say no and how to say no. And we can struggle to hear and respond appropriately to the feedback we receive. And the honest truth is that feedback resilience and hearing feedback is under the umbrella of assertive communication. And that's why I like to do them one after the other. So this is hard. On top of that, we all have different communication styles. We have different ways of looking at conflict. And within the work environment, there's a significant power differential. So all of this can make it really, really hard to advocate for ourselves at work, which means we have to be very proactive and assertive to get what we want from our educational and work experiences. And everything that we'll talk about today, largely from the perspective of work, it really applies to life as well. So I want to start with two important definitions so we're all on the right page. Self-advocacy is the act of representing yourself and your views with the goals of meeting your needs. And there were needs illustrated in that poll: the need for more quiet time, right, to work on your thesis, the need for more direction, the need for the person that you're living with to take care of themselves so you can focus on yourself. So self-advocacy is your you acting to represent yourself. There's, of course, another type of advocacy, and that's advocating for others. For many of us, it's much easier to advocate for others and pretty hard to advocate for ourselves. Assertiveness is the ability to express one's feelings and asserts one's rights and needs while respecting the feelings, rights, and needs of others. It's both parts. I speak up for what I need, and I am aware of and mindful of and respectful of the feelings, rights, and needs of others. It is our ability to use more direct communication, open and honest communication to address issues that concern us, and really important, the ability to set appropriate boundaries that feel right given the context and situation. And I want to stress that I will talk a lot about boundaries and say they are context and situation specific. That means depending on the person, we might share more or less. Depending on the topic, we might share more or less. And I'll come back to that again and again as we move through the material. A few things to make sure we're all on the same page about boundaries. A boundary is a demarcation between two things at its simplest, right? Personal boundaries are between yourself and others, and you can just think of boundaries as your personal limits. There are physical boundaries, mental boundaries, emotional boundaries, time and energy boundaries, material boundaries, all different kinds of boundaries. And they come really in two directions or two flavors: what we allow others to say and do to us, and what we share, say, and do with others. So we think about boundaries both ways. When we set a boundary, we determine what actions, what words, what behaviors we will accept from others and what we will not accept. And we also determine what we will share and not share. So boundaries are about us deciding where our lines are, what we're comfortable with, what we're not comfortable with. And the thing about boundaries is if you look towards their goals, it's really easy to see why it's important to work on developing the skill of setting healthy, strong boundaries. Setting boundaries help us avoid overwork. They help us avoid taking on somebody else's emotions and thoughts, right? If somebody around us is really caught in a whole sort of negative thought, negative story, right? And we're constantly on the receiving end. Remember, we said emotions spread, right? So negative emotions around us spread. Remember that our stories impact our emotions. So we have to have boundaries to avoid taking on other people's negative emotions and negative thoughts. Setting boundaries help us avoid violating personal and professional ethics. It is really important when we receive feedback to decide if that feedback was correct and warranted or incorrect and unwarranted. So we set a boundary around the feedback we receive. And setting boundaries helps us avoid doing things we don't want to do, either in the moment or in general. So a lot of really important things around setting boundaries. So what I'd like to do is pause here for a moment. We're going to hear first from students, postbacks and postdocs, and then we'll do a second survey and we'll hear from the faculty and administrators that are here with us. So setting boundaries is hard. And we have to set boundaries at home and at work. So in our personal lives and in our professional lives. And I would like you to think for a moment, in general, is it harder for you to set boundaries in your professional life or in your personal life? And we're going to go ahead and activate the next poll. If you arrived late, just use your phone to click on the QR code. And if you can't participate in the poll, no big deal. Go ahead and put it into the chat. I've been monitoring the chat. So this is students only, graduate students, undergrads, postbacks, postdocs. So professional is the hardest, not surprising, so much hierarchy, right? We are so worried about the people who have control over our progression in the program. Some people with both, and a good number of personal as well. So professional at 47%. All right, now we're going to go back and clear the survey and do it again. And there's a couple more people who added in much harder in professional in the chat. So it's actually probably a little bit more. Now we're going to hear from the faculty and administrators who are watching. Sometimes I have an expectation of a result. And I, in this case, was really curious to see the difference. And it looks about the same. Actually, it looks almost exactly the same. About half professional boundaries, and then a quarter personal and close to a quarter both. So setting boundaries at work is tough. Setting boundaries at home is tough, but not as tough. And for some of us, it can be hard in both arenas. I just want to, we're going to talk a lot about setting boundaries at work. And I want to sort of segue from boundary setting to assertive communication because they go hand in hand. But I want to do it by wrapping up with these few thoughts. So boundary setting skills are really learned in childhood, learned from our families, our cultures, and our prior experiences. For a lot of us, boundaries need to be relearned in adulthood. Sometimes people say to me, I'm not sure I ever learned how to set boundaries. And so this is a skill that we need to develop. I already said that boundaries should be looked at as context specific, right? Meaning that it depends on the person or people involved and the situation. So I might tell my boss, I'm struggling with some things at home and won't be around next week. And I might tell a coworker, here's what's going on for me, and go into a little bit more detail. And so boundaries are context specific. When I say porous, what I mean is as we build up trust with someone, we might open up and share more. If somebody doesn't respect us, then we might close our boundaries and tighten them up. So boundaries should be viewed as movable and context specific. Another thing that I want to say about setting boundaries is that you have rights and you need to know them and embrace them. There's a question here about whether NIH has a graduate student or postdoc Bill of Rights that universities can sort of adopt or ratify. And the honest truth is I'm not aware of one document like that, but I do know that there, and I can't remember the organization that wrote it, released a compact between faculty and their trainees that listed both rights and responsibilities. And I'll look into that a little bit and update you at the next time we meet. I think it's worth it for all of you to sit a little bit as a community and think about your rights. Because until we identify what our rights are, we can't protect them and embrace them. Some things that get in the way of boundary setting are the cognitive distortions that we learned about earlier, right? Because we think, oh my God, if I say no, they're going to be angry at me, right? Our cognitive distortions could lead us to catastrophizing, fortune telling, right? They'll kick me out. So our cognitive distortions get in the way. A lack of discomfort tolerance, which is why I talked about that a lot last time. It's uncomfortable to tell somebody no, or to tell someone we're going to have to do this differently, or here's my boundary. So we have to strengthen our discomfort tolerance. A lot of times we don't feel that we have the right to set boundaries, so shame and feelings of less than. Our view of hierarchy, and I'll talk a little bit about views of hierarchy as we move through. Sometimes we think, I would have this right, but it's my boss, so I don't. And then a general lack of assertiveness skills. So some of these are about how we feel about ourselves, the stories we're telling ourselves, right? And the more we're aware of those stories, the more we can learn to question them. The more we identify emotions that are holding us back, the more we can process them. But this last bullet is really a skill-driven thing. I think a lot of us have not learned boundary setting or assertiveness skills. And I think that is a key gap we can fill. So I gave you a bunch of journaling prompts, partially because this just happens to be a journaling rich topic, but also because in the comments from the last few have been a lot of questions about people wanting to journal more. And so I thought I would give you some prompts and you could use these prompts this time to sort of ramp up your journaling practice. So I'd like you to journal a little bit about what you've learned about boundaries from your families and cultures. And then a little bit about boundaries that would help you handle the current situations that you find yourself in. Go back to that first assignment where you were writing about what's holding you back and ask if there's any boundary setting involved. And that's a good journaling exercise that will give you a sense of what your internal beliefs of journaling are. If we want internal beliefs of boundaries are, sorry about that. Now, if we want to set boundaries, we have to learn assertive communication. It's really the foundation of boundary setting. So I have a journal prompt to go along with that. What did you learn about being assertive and about difficult conversations from your families and cultures? And I want you to think about this from the perspective of, I got some helpful messages and I possibly got some unhelpful messages. So which are generally helpful, which are generally not helpful. Because again, we go back to that concept that we've learned how to do this through prior experience. Some of what we learned is not adaptive. It's not helpful. In fact, it's maladaptive. So again, first goal is to bring awareness to the maladaptive behaviors that we've learned, and then we work to let them go. And this is hard, takes commitment and practice, but it can be done. So many stories I have with trainees who've done this set of workshops, who've worked on their own. outside of the workshops to develop these skills who've said to me, oh, I could never do that, right? I can't say that. I can't negotiate for more salary. I can't. And then they do, right? And they realize I can. And so these are learned skills. But we really need to understand where we need to understand assertiveness skills. We need to understand where our views of assertiveness come from. So we're going to dive into that material now. And we're going to start with this really helpful information that comes from a book that I really enjoyed, Clash, How to Thrive in a Multicultural World. And it's written by two social psychologists, sociologists, Hazel Rose Marcus and Alana Connor. And you can visit their website right there. But there's also a book you can buy on Amazon. So essentially, we walk through the world with seeing ourselves through a lens or perspective or construct of self. And at the sort of broadest breakdown, you can think of two constructs of self, the independent self or the interdependent self, or really easily thought of as me or we. If we've grown up in families and cultures largely driven in an independent self construct, then we view ourselves as separate from everyone around us. We can care about people around us, but our first care is about us. Our primary focus is our own needs, our desire to be heard, our goal setting, and how we reach our goals. So when something happens, our first perspective is, what about me? If we've grown up in families and cultures and environments driven by an interdependent lens or interdependent view of self, then we view ourselves as really connected to others and responsible for their welfare in some ways. Our primary focus then is supporting the group, maintaining tradition, respecting authority, and taking care of the needs of others. And so you can look at it this way, which I think is a nice visual way to see it. The independent system, we're separated from others. We might be very close to some people, right? Farther away from other people, but we see ourselves as a separate individual, the me lens. But if we grew up in an interdependent self system and spent a lot of time in interdependent self systems, our go-to first approach is that we see ourselves really interconnected, right? And maybe more connected to some people over others, but we generally see ourselves through the lens of how do we support others? How do we take care of others? So an independent or me self system, an interdependent or we self system. And this is a fabulous article, and I adapted this slide here from that article. So I want to give you an example because I think that that will make it easier to put this into action for yourself. So you're taking a class and that class involves a presentation. The teacher makes a mistake on the schedule and therefore asks for a volunteer. And that volunteer has to give their presentation with only 1 week's notice. This could be department seminar if you're done classes, but you get the point, right? Somebody's going to have to take one for the team and go with only 1 week's notice. If you tend to see the world largely through an independent lens, you're going to say something like, no way. I want to do a great job. 1 week's not enough. I'm not volunteering. I think the teacher's wrong to ask. I'm not going to agree to this, even if they volunteer me. That's if you see the world largely through an independent lens. If, on the other hand, you see the world largely through an interdependent lens, going through your mind might be, oh no, the teacher asked, I should volunteer. Maybe somebody else will, but if not, I'm going to. Or you might actually say, my friends are all stressed. I'll say yes, so they don't have to do it. Your first thought was towards the collective. Now, we walk through the world with a particular lens on based on where we grew up and the communities that we've spent time in international students who've moved from various countries sometimes are steeped in one lens at one point, a different construct of self at another point. So this is not to say we are fixed and hardwired. We're not at all. And in fact, if we're aware of this, I could say, well, I tend to always look at things through an independent lens, but what about others here? So I don't mean to say we're stuck in any way, but we do all tend to come at problems through our construct of self, or the lens with which we see our place in society. So we're going to look now in this community of 200 plus people where most of us see ourselves. So we're going to vote now, this time all together, PIs, staff, trainees. What is your sort of default self construct? Great, thank you, Anna. So about half interdependent and about a third independent. Knowing where we tend to start from is really important because this impacts your communication. So if your go-to default construct of self is independent, then you're pretty willing to be assertive. You see your relationship with your boss as somewhat equal and fluid. You could tell your boss they made a mistake, right? And you tend to really focus on a direct communication style. And the goal is, let's communicate, get work done. Let me take care of myself. Hopefully on the way you can take care of yourself. Here we go. But if you have a more interdependent view of self or construct of self, then you see your relationship with your boss and colleagues in your workspace as more unequal and fixed. So it's harder to say to your boss, I don't agree, or to say to a coworker that you think has seniority over you or a little bit more place in the group than you do. It's hard to say, no, I have to use the PCR machine first, because you see relationships as unequal and fixed. So your willingness to be assertive is lower, and you focus on the group needs, saving face, harmony, and agreement, and often use an indirect communication style. The reason it's important to know this is that to be assertive means to use a somewhat direct communication style. So if our go-to style is indirect, then there's some learning and growing that needs to be done to be assertive. If on the other hand, we have a really direct communication style, right, too direct, it can be alienating, especially if we view our relationship with our boss as equal and fluid, but they do not see it the same way. And then our growing is to dampen our direct communication style, our direct independent way of seeing things, right, to soften and be more focused on group needs, etc. So for the most part, all of us benefit from looking at where we start and looking towards the other with an effort to stretch. Neither is right or wrong, neither is good or bad. There are beautiful things from both lenses, right? But there are liabilities and issues with both. So the goal is really to get at that. So I want to make sure you understand what I mean by direct versus indirect communication. So here's a nice example. You want to let your boss know you'll be taking a 3-day weekend. And it's spring break here. So so many people in my office let me know that they were going to be away. And I could see this direct and indirect communication just in these simple communications. So you want to let your boss know you're going to take a 3-day weekend. Somebody with a direct communication style, well, I want to let you know I'm going to be out this Friday for a 3-day weekend. Clear, direct. Indirect, I wonder if it would be okay for me to take off this Friday for a 3-day weekend. I've had people say to me, I've been working hard. Some time off would be helpful. That's an even more indirect example. And another one, your friend missed an appointment that the two of you made to get together and study or work on something, right? They missed it. They call later and they ask if it was a problem that they missed it. Somebody with a direct communication style might say, I was disappointed. I really wanted to work together, study together. Can we reschedule for tomorrow? Very focused on here's what I need. Here's my feelings, thoughts about what happened. Indirect. Yeah, it would be nice to reschedule, right? Not really clear when, not clear. A sigh can be read as many, many things, right? So an indirect way of communicating. So it's important to keep that in mind. Do you communicate more directly or more indirectly? Also, ask yourself, is that impacted by work? Because all of you said, right, or many said, it's much harder to be assertive and set boundaries at work. So do you use a more indirect communication style at work? That's a key question to ask yourself. Now, that's one thing that we can talk about is direct and indirect. Now I want to define some communication styles within there, and I want to focus on passive, aggressive, assertive, and passive aggressive communication. So passive is very indirect. You accept or allow what happens, what others do. You don't respond, you don't resist, you don't say anything. Aggressive is a direct communication style. You pursue your aims and interests forcefully without care for others, the relationship, the long-term consequences. Assertive is a direct communication style, and that's the one we're really trying to learn and develop, and that is having and showing a confident and clear approach to meeting your needs, communicating directly, but keeping in mind the respect and dignity of the other person. Now, passive aggressive is both direct and indirect, because you go about your meeting your needs by saying one thing and doing another. So that's both direct and indirect. And again, I want to give you an example. But before I do that, I wanted to give you another way of seeing this. So in every interaction, there's what you need and there's what somebody else needs, right? So there's what I need or want and what you need and want. Assertive communication factors in both. I'm going to go after what I need while being aware of what you need. All right. So that's what I want you to focus on. So I'm going to give you an example. You and a partner have a journal club at the end of the week. You happen to have a test this week and are super busy. You meet with your partner to go over the presentation. The two of you realize you have to reduce some of the slides. You have to make some new ones. You got some work to do. Your partner tells you they can't do a whole lot because they have family visiting this whole week. It's just not a good week for them. Somebody who communicates passively doesn't say anything and just agrees to make the slides. Okay. Aggressive communication style, you get angry. I'm not doing it. This is for a grade. It's supposed to be both of us. Just because your family's here, that's not my problem, right? That's a more aggressive way. Assertive. You share that you have a big exam and you ask, can we strategize about ways to get the work done together, right? You care about your needs, but you also are focused on their needs. And passive aggressive, you say, no worries, I'll take care of it. But then you email the teacher later, you ask the teacher about rescheduling, and you don't even tell your partner that you're going to do this. So that's passive aggressive. Look at this one example. Think about interactions that you've had with others where you can see these different styles. Think about your own communication. Where do you see yourself falling more or, most of the time, some of the time? Is it context specific, right? With some people, you find yourself becoming totally passive when you don't want to be. Do you find yourself being aggressive when you don't mean to be, right? Take a look at these. This is a really nice thing to think about because, again, it starts with self-awareness. The minute we are self-aware about how we're communicating, that's when we can start making change. Just to give you a little bit more guidance in this, I gave you this table adapted from this website, sort of what passive, assertive, and aggressive communication looks like. And I want to really just focus right now on the outcome at the end, which is assertive communication increases your chance of getting what you want. And it also helps you feel heard. Aggressive communication, you might get what you want, but you're going to alienate people, or at least you risk alienating people. And passive communication, you may not get what you want because it's not always easily understood through your message. And so you want to really look here at this column because it gives you the best chance of getting what you want. Now, a lot of things hold us back from being assertive. And I probably am missing some things. So you can put things into the chat if you think I'm missing some stuff. One is that we don't believe we actually have a right to be assertive. And that's a really key one. It goes back to that idea of that you have rights and you need to embrace them. Sometimes we're not sure of what we want or need, right? It's hard to be assertive and advocate for ourselves when we don't know what we need. We are very focused. We're human social creatures, so we are very focused on being liked. Sometimes we're not assertive because we're afraid of displeasing others. I'll go back to that concept of discomfort tolerance. We're not assertive because it's going to feel uncomfortable in the moment, and we lack discomfort tolerance. So we avoid that discomfort, losing out in the end, but feeling better in the moment. Cognitive distortions can lead us to tell stories that hold us back. Sometimes none of those things get in the way, but the minute you put hierarchy onto it, they all get in the way. So sometimes hierarchy is a really big barrier for us. And then there's skills here. And I'm going to talk a lot about assertiveness skills. And that can be one other thing that can hold us back. So I'd like you to think about which of these apply to you. And again, if Slido doesn't work for you, just go ahead and put it in the chat. This could be very well more than one, but just go ahead and rank order them. So just select the one that's, oops, that's the wrong one. There you go. The one that is most problematic at the top, then to the least problematic for you. And we'll wait for a whole bunch of people to vote. So at the top here, we'll keep this open, let you keep voting while I talk a little bit. At the top here is afraid of displeasing others or not being liked, which doesn't surprise me at all. We are so hardwired to connect to others, and it's hard to imagine that we can be assertive and maintain the connections that matter to us. When you put hierarchy on top of that, like nobody wants to displease their boss. So right there, right next to it is struggles in terms of hierarchy, discomfort tolerance, a lack of skills, right? And I hope that we can address that today, and that if we did this poll in a month or two, that you might give different answers. And then almost everything was noted by a good number of you, right? So all of these are things that get in the way. Thanks, Anna. So I just want to hold on this slide for one moment for you to take a look at it. And maybe set an intention inside for yourself right now of ones that you'd like to explore more deeply, whether that's through journaling, through reading, through coming to the groups next week and talking about it. Because each and every one of these, if we raise our awareness, if we look at it from multiple angles, where did we get these messages? What's maladaptive for us in this? What might we like to change? We can make change in all of these areas, and a bunch of small change can lead to a chance to be more assertive. To help with that, I want you to do this journaling exercise. First, I want you to think about a time when you struggled to be assertive and communicate your needs effectively. And I want you to journal about what happened, why you think it happened, how it made you feel. You can write about things you wish had gone differently. And do that for a while. But then I want you to let go of that situation and think, well, where's the time when I really nailed this? A time you were assertive and you communicated your needs effectively. Focus on what happened, why you think it happened, how it made you feel, anything you wish had gone differently. And also, I want you to think a little bit after you do both of these, were there differences, right? Were you taking care of yourself more when it went well compared to when it didn't? Did you get guidance and practice when it went well compared to when it didn't? Just try to think, what are the differences? Because again, that's the way we learn and make change. And so one more journaling activity for you for this week. So when we think about being assertive, there's a lot of things to think about. One is what we want to be assertive about. I'll try, to give examples here today related to work, but there's all kinds of things at work and at home. Who we want to be assertive with, from very close, intimate partners, friends, acquaintances, service workers, strangers, supervisors, and authority figures. They all have challenges. And then why we want to be assertive. Sometimes it's to get our needs met. Sometimes we want to express a concern. Sometimes we want to be assertive to support someone else, right? That advocacy for others requires assertiveness, and it takes assertiveness to make change. There are a bunch of strategies for assertive communication. I feel like a broken record in stressing self-awareness, but I think it's such a key one in everything we've learned about, but in this one in particular. We have to work hard to make change, because that lens, that construct of self, that is something that that it takes a lot of work to bring awareness to. And so also all of these skills are hard to use when faced with hierarchy or someone we really care about, right? Because our fight, flight, freeze, stress, it's right there, our stress response. And we know that we can learn to slow it down and calm it, but it takes a lot of work. We need to understand communication and conflict styles. I'll talk a lot about communication styles in 3 weeks. I'll briefly introduce you to the idea of conflict styles today. We need some communication tools for assertiveness. And then we need to revisit our resilience strategies and our stress management strategies and our discomfort tolerance strategies. Because without those, we will not start being more assertive. I just want to talk a little bit about the stress around being assertive, and then I'm going to honor my commitment to give everybody a break. So let's start from first principles that personal safety comes first, educational and career safety come first. These are really important things. And so to go and say something difficult and hard to someone who has the ability to impact your career progression, your educational progression, right? That's scary. So it makes sense that we would have a lot of stress around assertiveness. The stress comes from our cognitive distortions as well. You all noted that in the poll. I just want to highlight 3 that I think are really problematic. Catastrophizing, actually 4, I realize I missed one. Catastrophizing, we imagine the worst if we say what we have to say. Mind reading, we think we know what the other person is going to say and it's not going to be good. Fortune telling, we think we imagine the outcome and we imagine ones that aren't very good. And I think imposter fears make it really hard for us to believe we have a right to be assertive. And so that's an oversight on my part not to include that one. When it comes to putting the stress of this into context, I think a really important thing is this concept of risks and rewards. Because every time we're assertive, it comes with a risk, but it also comes with the potential of a big reward. And I think it's really helpful to ask ourselves these 4 questions. How important is this to me? How important is the relationship to me? Now, sometimes people say to me, well, the relationship is really important, so I won't say anything. But I want to actually ask you to reconsider that. Because if the relationship is important, then you want it to be based on open, authentic, assertive communication, right? You don't want to get into a pattern of not getting your needs met in an important relationship. So those are the first 2 questions. Then you want to ask yourself, is this part of a pattern? Because if it is, if I choose not to be assertive, will it have an unintended long-term consequence that this pattern is just perpetuated? right? And nobody knows to correct it because I don't say anything about it. And then I want you to ask a question to address the fear head on. And that is your fear of taking action really warranted? Maybe even I should say fully warranted, because the fear makes sense to me every time we have an assertive conversation. I like to call them also difficult conversations, right? There's a risk, right, of something going awry, not going well. So fear is an appropriate emotion, but are we putting that into perspective? All right. So those are 4 questions as you weigh decisions. So I promised a break and I'm going to honor it. It is 2:59 here on the East Coast, and we are going to come back at 3:04. So we're going to take a full 5-minute break. If at the end I don't finish, I'll kick myself and adjust next time. So everybody up and stretch, go get some water, go look at the beautiful weather, and I will see you back here at 3:04. I should unmute myself or else it won't be very effective. Jackie muted me because you could all hear my conversation with Teo, I see. Thank you, Jackie. There's a question that I want to address before we move on, and that is direct or indirect communication better? And the answer is it depends on the context. Sometimes using direct communication is really appropriate, and sometimes indirect communication is appropriate. And so it's context specific. And one of the things that journaling is so helpful at is as we work on these skills and we journal about them, we can pay some attention to that. When did it go well? And how did we express ourselves? For sure, when we're talking to somebody about something we're upset about, direct communication can cause them to become very defensive. On the other hand, if we're too indirect, they won't even know what we're upset about. And so you're going to have to always be judging what is the best choice. Guess what I would say is if you always use one or always use the other, ask yourself, what can I do to expand my options? So a long time ago, I was introduced to the Thomas-Kilmann conflict grid. And I find it a really helpful way to look at our options when we're thinking about a difficult conversation, when we're thinking about whether to be assertive about something, let it go, and sort of how to approach problems. This is in and of itself like an hour lecture, so we're not going to go into a lot of depth. But I want to introduce it and encourage you to read some more online. NIH offers a webinar on conflict. I'll take a look at when the next one is and let everybody in this community know, and I'm sure we can open it up. So this gives us a framework for understanding the different ways we all tend to handle conflict or difficult conversations. And the key thing is that all approaches have benefits and all approaches have liabilities. And this gives us a chance to start evaluating the different approaches and looking at which ones we tend to use, because most of us use one or two as our go-to approach. And this also helps us over time expand our options. So the really key thing about this is it's 2 dimensions: focus on self and focus on others, right? Or the me and we from before, right? So focus on self is also called task, how motivated you are to achieve your own goals, right? And get your needs met. And you can ask yourself, how much does this matter to me? Focus on relationship or others is how motivated you are to support the other party in reaching their goals and objectives. And you can ask yourself to get at how much relationship matters, how much does this person and this relationship matter to me? And they put focus on others on the x-axis and focus on self on the y-axis. And then they talk about 5 styles. And I just want to go look here at these 2 at opposite corners. A competing style, you're really worried only about yourself. And it's sort of my way or the highway. We're doing it my way, no other way. The opposite side of that, high on focus on others, but low on focus on self, is accommodating, sure, whatever, right? So those are opposite. Avoiding is essentially silence, completely just, not answering the email. Somebody says something to you, it bothers you, you just shrug your shoulders and walk away. The two that really take a lot of work at our assertive communication are compromising and collaborating. Compromising is you win some, you lose some. The two parties involved each get something, but they each lose something. Whereas collaborating is this, let's get creative, expand the options, and try to come up with a really creative way of solving this problem. Now, I don't want to talk in detail about this, but this is a great table for you all to look at, because each of these is appropriate at times, and each of these is not appropriate at times. And sometimes we get really caught in, this didn't work, and we say, okay, I won't try again. But it was that it wasn't right for that situation, or we did a great job, but the other person didn't engage with us. And so we want to be really careful and keep in mind that it depends on the situation, context specific, right? It depends on the people involved. And the more we are familiar with all of these styles, the more we know when to use one over the other, the better off we will be. And I think this table helps with this a little bit. So for example, avoiding is a great idea when it really doesn't matter to you, or when you really don't feel safe speaking up. I want you to ask yourself, am I as unsafe as I think? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer might be, I could speak up, right? But so avoiding can be good when safety is at risk, when it really doesn't matter. But if this is all you ever do, right, and it's a part of a pattern for you, eventually resentment is going to grow. And if you avoid and it really does matter, you lost your chance to weigh in. So avoiding is a really passive style, right? Competing can be aggressive. It can be done in a way that's not aggressive, right? That is respectful, but you are really much more focused on you than on others. When something really matters to you and you are sure you're right, sometimes we use a competing style. When safety or ethics are involved, we use a competing style. I noticed in the chat earlier when we were talking about why you're not assertive, that somebody said, sometimes I'm not sure I'm right, right? Sometimes we are sure. And so competing would be an appropriate style as long as we use a competing style with respect. But if competing is our only style, and we often find ourselves alienating people, right? That's a problem. So this table goes through that for each of these. And I wish I had time to go through all of the material, but there's so much that I want to get through that we're going to leave the Thomas-Kilmann at that we have choices, and that they are based on the extent that we are looking out for our needs and the extent that we are looking out for someone else's needs. And I'm going to use this again next week when we talk about communication styles. So with that background, here's a toolkit for assertiveness. And it starts with some decision-making questions. And there are 8 or 7 of them. What approach is appropriate for this situation? What are the options available to me? And then we have to think of best, worst, and middle outcome. Sometimes there's something we can be happy with, but it's not the best outcome, right? So what is best, worst, and middle? Sometimes we need information to make a good decision. So what questions do I need to ask to make a good decision? And then sometimes we're going to enter into a conversation with someone. We know that we're asking them to give us something, and we might want to be creative and say, is there something I can offer to balance or mitigate their concerns, right? So task, I want my needs met. Relationship, can I offer something to help there? And that would be that more collaborating style of communication. Those are some decision-making questions. You need to focus on these last 2 that go along with it. Who can help me prepare, especially in hierarchical environments where you are concerned for your educational and career progression? You want to make sure that you prepare and that you have the right support systems. And if you really don't feel safe, then who is it at your institution that can step in and make sure that you have as much safety as possible? So these are sort of the beginning of a decision-making process to speak up. And then we need tools for speaking up. The first tool are I statements, which are taking responsibility for your feelings, your wants, and your needs, and expressing them clearly. And the structure is I feel, when, because, I would like. And you'll see here elements of a more passive or indirect communication style. Apropos to that question, are they always bad? Clearly not. Sometimes we don't use all four parts, but here's one. You're working on a group project, a team member is not responding to you, you submitted the draft last week, you submitted another updated draft by email, and you're not getting any responses. So an I statement starts, I feel anxious, I feel frustrated, you fill in the feeling there, when I'm working on a project and my emails aren't responded to, because I want to finish the project without stress. I would appreciate if you can make this a priority and let me know when I can expect to hear from you. So how you feel, right? I feel, when, I would like. That's a nice example of assertive communication. Your PI's expectations during the pandemic, in your opinion, are unrealistic. I feel overwhelmed and concerned when I read the long list of experiments outlined here, because I want to make progress and contribute even under these circumstances. I would like to Zoom with you to talk about it, right? A clear, here's how you feel, why, and what you would like. And here's one where somebody in the research group is making jokes or comments that are microaggressions that are making you and or others feel uncomfortable. I feel hurt, disrespected, unwelcomed. Again, you pick the right word that fits you. We talked a lot last time about thinking through how we're feeling and what language we want to use. I feel unwelcome when I hear comments about, I would like for you to stop making these comments. Maybe you're not advocating for yourself in the moment, you're an ally stepping up. I believe that some of our colleagues feel angry or unwelcome when they hear others make statements about, I would like for you to stop making these statements. So these are 3 examples of I statements. You'll get to work on I statements a lot in the groups. It's funny, I feel like we hear about them all the time and learn about them a lot. And yet it really takes practice to put it together, especially when you're feeling poked and charged in the moment. Another really important strategy for assertive communication is empathic listening. You summarize what you think the communicator is expressing. You don't necessarily agree. In fact, if you don't agree, you don't want to give the impression that you do. You just summarize what you think they're thinking, feeling, meaning, what their needs are. You might ask clarifying questions, right? Can you explain this? Can you clarify this, right? So empathic listening is summarizing and asking helpful questions. So I'm going to give you an example of that. Someone in your lab is pressuring you to give up the cell culture hood. You signed up for that time weeks in advance, but suddenly they want it. I hear you say that you're worried about getting your paper published before your grant is due. You want me to let you use the cell culture hood at 10 o'clock today. First, you need to make sure, what if it's 10 o'clock every day, right? You say yes, and you just agreed that you're going to take yourself off for the next few weeks. So you want to first make sure you understand, is that correct? Now, here, the empathic listening goes one step further, trying to understand why. Can you explain more clearly what you need to do and how long you might take in the hood? My putting that there is because it might lead to, rather than you accommodate, it might lead to a different solution. We're going to share the 1 hour. Here's how we're going to do it, right? And so here's empathic listening. Here's another empathic listening tool or example, you're talking to your friend who's disappointed because twice they invited you to socialize via Zoom. You have a review due for your PI. So you want to be a good friend, but you really need to set strong boundaries until you turn your review in. I hear that you're disappointed that I did not make time for the 2 Zoom sessions you invited me to this week. If I understand you feel I let you down and you really need a friend right now, can we talk about it so I can be a good friend and take care of my work deadline right now? That's another nice example of making sure you understand, affirming their feelings. You feel let down, right? You need a friend right now. So you're acknowledging that you heard what they said and you're offering to talk about it. Fogging and stuck record, calmly responding with a minimal response focused on any truth in the statement without becoming defensive or argumentative. It's interesting, there's a question right there that just popped up or a comment in the chat about what to do when you're doing really well using these tools, but the other person becomes triggered, then you get flustered. And one of the nice things is to go to fogging and stuck record. Fogging is you just calmly respond. I understand you're upset right now because I didn't clean the cell culture hood. Stuck record, you repeat it again and again. You don't raise your tone, you don't become angry, you don't become irritated. So you can try these 2 tools. You also, when people get really charged, and you get charged, and now it's like charged squared, you can say, this is not the best time for us to talk. Can we all take a break and revisit this later? And I'll talk a little bit about that later. Here's an example of fogging and stuck record. You're going to take time off over the holidays. Your PI is giving you a little bit of a hard time. Work has been slow because of the pandemic. So you're partway into the conversation. And your PI's already pointed out, oh, you have a lot of work to get done. I understand we lost time due to the pandemic. I also want to get as much work done as possible. Nonetheless, I am burned out and want to see family. That is why I will be taking vacation December, blah, blah, blah. Your PI comes, oh, science comes first. You could be farther along if you cared about your work. Now, I know that's really anxiety producing to graduate student or postdoc, but the honest truth is you're burned out. You need a vacation. Yes, science comes first for you and for me. Still, I'm burned out and time off over the holidays is a priority for me. That's why I'll be taking some vacation. Now, remember I said you could think about, could I offer something? And maybe in this example, you might say, what can I do before I leave to decrease your stress about this? They might say, can you at least get this one thing done for me? Or can you check your email Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning, right? So fogging and stuck record are ways when you want to bring the energy down a little bit to just calmly state where things are at. Stuck record is you continue to put your needs on the table. Negative and positive inquiry are using questions to probe the meaning of feedback when you want or need more information. A lot of assertive conversation is getting the feedback that you need. So let's look at positive inquiry first. You present a virtual poster, somebody gives you this feedback, good job, keep it up. Like, good job, keep what up, right? It's not that helpful. You wonder which part was good. So positive inquiry would be like, thanks, I'm glad you liked it. So I can learn from this and continue to improve. Can you give me a little bit more information? Can we talk in more detail? You could even ask questions, right? What did you think about the introduction, or what did you like about it? Now, negative inquiry is just the opposite. It's when you got negative feedback that you can't work with. Here's one: you might not be cut out for graduate school. What does that mean, right? Oh, that is disappointing to hear. Grad school is important to me. I'd like to learn from the experience. Would you mind going over the slides and talking in more detail? Now, everybody has listened to all of these examples, and you've all said Sharon is crazy, right? She prepared these calmly in her office, no problem. She heard these stories, right? And she wrote them in a calm way. I do think it's hard to pull this off in the moment. It's not graceful. Maybe it's not as polished as what I wrote here. The honest truth is, as you work on your wellness, as you work on your stress management, as you learn these skills, as you really work to understand your patterns and find helpful ones and let go of unhelpful ones, you can do better. It's a growth mindset, right? Maybe you can't do these yet. So we're going to do a poll about I statements, empathic listening, fogging, stuck record. So I just want you to think of which of these do you actually use now? Maybe you didn't realize what they were called, but go ahead and let us know which ones of these you use now. So I tend to see positive and negative inquiry at the bottom a lot of the time. I think when we get sort of unuseful, unhelpful, positive input, we just, oh, we got some good input, let me go. But then later we wish we had more information. And of course, when somebody says something negative, we enter such a freeze response. Those are very, very hard. I think I statements and empathic listening are probably the two that get the most press and the most chances to practice. I have seen so many students do well with stuck record. With PIs, I really need, I appreciate the timing of this isn't good, but I really want to go to the meeting. I've seen that work around vacations, meetings, getting papers submitted. I think these are really great skills. All right, so there we go, a little bit of a sense of what people need to work on. So I already stressed it takes preparation and practice. It's really an iterative process. We do better. We look at why we did better. We try it again. We add a new skill. I'm going to talk a little bit about something called a clear ask in a moment, but it's really critical to make a clear ask. So when you want something, that's a time when direct communication matters, and I call that a clear ask. There was a question in there about when people get charged or you get totally flustered. I want you just to remember that time is a great tool. Time in advance to practice and prepare, pausing before responding to collect your thoughts in the moment, saying you will think about it or asking for time to get back to them, and suggesting everyone takes time and meets again, especially if emotions are high. Time is your ally here. People have an immediate response and often come down. Now, this all presumes that the person you're talking with wants to engage you, right? And I understand that some of you feel you're in environments where that's not the case. And without a doubt, it takes two, all right? But often a little bit of time and people coming back will help a lot. It is very important to engage mentors and relevant institutional officials when you have really serious concerns or you are concerned for your safety. It's really important to keep that in mind. So just want to make sure you understand what I mean by a clear ask. That's being specific about what you're asking for. And that's both yourself, you need to know what you're asking for, but it's also in your communication, right? So I would appreciate your help with this, right? I feel frustrated. I can't finish this without your input. I would appreciate your help with this. That's not a very clear ask, right? But I would appreciate if you give me a sense of when I can expect to hear from you, or I would like to receive your input by Monday at noon, or I would appreciate if you would edit the abstract and introduction so I can start making changes. A clear ask. What is it that you want from the person that you are going to talk with? And I just like to cue myself with just those two words, clear ask. All right. So when I get ready to go see one of my bosses or an office that I collaborate with, where I want something, I'm like, what is my clear ask? And I think it really, really helps to keep that language in mind. This is one of the best books in this area. You can get it on Amazon. You're Perfect Right. It's, I think, up to the 11th edition right now. Some assertiveness is about saying no. And, you know, people feel guilty if they say no, right? It's my friend, my family member, my boss, so I can't say no. So you agree and say yes. You ignore your needs completely. Then your needs are not met and you feel resentful. You feel tired. You feel used. You feel like people will use the phrase like a doormat. So we're going to do one last poll here. It is so hard to say no. So I want you to think about a time when you recently said yes, when you really wished you had said no. And I know for me, it was this weekend when I agreed to go and meet a friend for a project when I knew that I had things to do at the house and I was sort of maxed out. And I said yes because, well, I want to be liked. Organizing someone else's samples for them. A committee participation, so a faculty member who said yes when they, oh, maybe this one isn't my strength. When my friend asked if he wants to go biking today. Anything else? Organizing a lab seminar, doing an experiment when I really needed to be studying, helping with a grant application. I agreed to do a virtual poster, offered to carry a lot of books for my brother, even though I didn't need to, doing laundry on Friday night. Sometimes I agree to cook when I don't want to. I never agree to do laundry though, but I often when I don't feel, oh, cooking dinner, somebody else. Meetings and collaborations, doing a presentation on pretty short notice, right? We all agreeing to talk to incoming students, being on a panel, when a diversity and inclusion panel, when it doesn't seem to me that it leads to real results and it's my time. I came to lab on the weekend to check on somebody else's samples, right? Lots and lots of different things that we wish we had said no to. Now, the honest truth is, thanks, Anna. The honest truth is sometimes we say yes because we see a benefit. And in the end, even if we wished we didn't have to do it, we're glad we did. But a lot of times we say yes when we should have said no. I think these questions help. I love this one. Will it matter in a week, a month, or a year from now, even a day from now? Some of the things on there, right? The question is, it probably wouldn't even matter the next day, right? Other questions, will it help me reach one of my important goals? Does it provide an intangible benefit important to me right now? So sometimes we're super busy and we want to say no, we think we should say no, but it nurtures that part of us that gives us purpose. So it's interesting, the comment about the panel, the diversity and inclusion panel, right? I wish I had said no. Somebody else might have said, I didn't have time and I said yes because it was high school students and they needed to hear about my career path, right? So it depends, again, context specific when we say yes and when we say no. And I was told once by a group of tenure track PIs at NIH that sometimes it's just helpful to have some words. They don't come out so smoothly the first time, but they get better and better. So here are some words. I'm sorry, I can't participate in this, perhaps another time. I'm sorry, but my current situation makes it impossible for me to do this. I'm sorry, I have a lot going on. I can't take that on right now. Two things, don't over apologize. And don't say, ask me again, unless you really mean it. Because for something like, let's say there's 4 recruiting weekends, you say no to the first one, you say, ask me again, they're going to ask it the second. Now, it's really important that we be good community citizens. And there was in the Q&A is something about, well, assertiveness versus selfishness, right? Sometimes we need to think beyond ourselves, right? We want to add value to the collective community. But if we are burned out and exhausted, we can't add a whole lot of value. And so I want to wrap up with a little bit coming back to this assertiveness toolkit. We talked about this already. I realize I didn't change the first slide. I talked about who can help prepare and who can add to safety. I wanted to add one other question. Who can give me realistic and knowledgeable advice? Sometimes we get advice from the wrong people. They love us and they want to give advice, but they don't know the environment. Sometimes we want to hear from peers, but they're at the same stage as us or just near peer, a little ahead of us, and they understand their circumstance really well. So it's good to hear from them because we want to gather information from many people. but you also want to get advice from people who have a wealth of knowledge. One of the key things for every graduate student and postdoc to do is to know who on their campus are the go-to supporters. The people who have a long list of resources that can help, the people who have seen lots of different situations, because you want to go and get realistic and knowledgeable advice. The higher the stakes, the more important that is. So I just want to wrap up with two things, and hopefully we're going to have time to watch a little video of people in my office demonstrating some of these skills through an improv. So I just want to give you a framework for decision making. All right. So the first thing you have to decide is whether to address the issue or share the information. Because remember, you get to choose. You can avoid. You can decide it's not worth it. You can decide it's not the right time to have a conversation. You get to choose. So I just want to give you a framework for deciding whether to address an issue or share information. I'm going to focus here on sharing information. There's a lot going on at home that's affecting your stress level and your sleep, and this is affecting the quality and quantity of your work. And so you need to decide, do I talk with my PI or not? The second question is, if you decide to talk with your PI, how much information will you share? But I want to give you a decision tree for talking or not talking, or sharing or not sharing. And I like to call this a risk-reward scaffold. So for each, and you put this on a piece of paper. I decide to tell her what are the risks and what are the rewards. I'm going to not tell her what are the risks, what are the rewards. And here I just did this for you for that particular situation. Right? I'm not getting a lot of work done. Maybe they notice, maybe they don't. I'm nervous about it. Things in my life are complicated. I'm not feeling well. What do I tell? Or do I tell? So the risk of sharing is it could feel embarrassing. Maybe your PI is going to say something that makes you feel even worse. Maybe your catastrophizing mind says, oh my gosh, if I tell them that, they're going to, oh, get out. I don't want you in lab, right? There's some risks. List them all, because you get to then decide which of these are real, which of these might be your catastrophizing mind. What are the rewards? Potential rewards. I should put potential in both of those. My PI is supportive. My stress level decreases. My PI actually has some ideas of ways that I can navigate this. It feels good to be honest. My PI has correct information, so they're not guessing. They're not one, oh, maybe she didn't like this science anymore, right? It's that they know what's happening. What are the risks of not sharing? My PI makes incorrect assumptions. There's potential for bad will if they find out later what was going on. Why didn't I know this? Why didn't you tell me? What are the potential rewards? Well, one is you avoid the discomfort of sharing. Maybe you feel more independent, right? You solved it on your own. But really, right, this is one where you have to say, is that really a reward? But I need to be clear that sometimes it's safety from a difficult PI or an abusive PI. So there is no right share, no share. It's risks and rewards, and it's unique to you and the other person or people involved. Sometimes we extend this. I'll do this with someone and I'll say, okay, well, if you're not going to share it with your PI, are there other people you might share with? Right? Is there somebody else you might talk with? But I love this as the beginning of a scaffold. It helps us decide whether to address an issue. Then you need to decide what to discuss or share, how much depth. And remember, boundaries. How much detail? Boundaries. A general rule of thumb is share as much as necessary, but don't share more. Share more as trust goes up. If you have a PI who's generally had your back, who you really trust, you've seen them in interactions with you and others, you've seen them behave in really supportive ways, then you might want to tell them a little bit more about what's going on. But if you are new, you're unsure, you have evidence to suggest sharing is not a good idea, then you want to share less. Hey, I want to let you know something is going on in my life right now. I'm working through it, but I'm struggling to be quite as productive. I think you need to know. You never want to use the other person in an incorrect way. So you don't want to use a mentor as a friend as a therapist, right? We always want to maintain boundaries. And then you want to decide when to share, how to share, where to share, whether it's going to be email or Zoom. Eventually we'll be back in person. Do you want to go have a cup of coffee? Do you want to do it in the office, etc.? And so this is just a little bit of a framework for decision making. And I'm going to wrap up with 4 final points, and then we'll look at the tape and take some questions. So one thing is, you can develop beautiful skills in this regard. You can be courageous and brave and use them. You can be respectful and clear, but you can't make anyone do anything they don't want to do. And the only person's behavior you control is yours. That's why it's so important that we help graduate students and new postdocs, people looking for positions, understand how important it is to find a quality mentoring situation. Because if your PI isn't well-intentioned, or the program director or the other person you're talking with isn't well-intentioned, it doesn't matter how beautifully you do. That said, I think that there's something to be said for speaking up for ourselves. So developing our assertiveness skills and using them, it's really a win, even if you don't get the outcome you had hoped for, because you are developing skills. There's something to be said for being seen and heard, right? Something to be said for standing up for ourselves. And sometimes students leave a meeting disappointed and they tell me still, I felt great. I said what I wanted to say. Sometimes they leave a meeting, I feel great, and I'm so surprised because my catastrophizing, fortune-telling mind told me I wouldn't get this, but I did. And so I want to remind you of those 3 things. The other thing is, people want somehow to eliminate all risk. In relationships, you can never eliminate all of the risk. So the key questions are, what are the risks? How high are they? And what resources are available if a worst case scenario comes to pass? What support do I have? And somebody told me they love the animals and that I should come up with more. And I love a challenge. You all know Teo, you've heard him bark. And this is Austin, our cat. When he was a kitten, he's a lot bigger. I'm not sure he could fit in that box anymore. But here, cats and dogs, clear asks and assertiveness strategies, assess risks and rewards, try to expand options, soften distorted thinking, and you can just think of cats. Dogs, don't go unprepared, offer or ask for time as needed, growth mindset, right? This is a learned skill and it's hard. And finally, the S is seek advice and support, especially when the stakes are high. And if you notice, both of them are engaged here and help with food. This is the Penzies spice box for my cooking, and Austin was helping me organize my spices. And Teo is a great dishwasher, much better than I am. So what we're going to do is be flies on the wall. I am going to keep the chat opened. This is an improv from my office. So these are 5 or 6 staff members. I'm sorry, something about the way I saved the tape didn't give the gallery view. It's just the speaker view, but we're going to go ahead and watch this. As you see something good or bad, put it in there. If you see broken record, put it in there. If you see empathic listening, put it in there. Whatever you see, go ahead and mark it down. All right, so here we go. And I'm sorry to have called this meeting last minute. I'm glad you could all come.
Sharon, can I just interrupt for a moment? I really was very excited to do this, but I've been having back pain since last week, and I have been feeling better, but today is not a good morning. So I was wondering if you mind if I don't work for this group today, because I don't think I'm going to give my 100%. Is that okay?
Oh, thank you for telling me. I'm sorry to hear you're not feeling well. I'll catch up with you later. Thanks, Elena.
Sounds good. Thank you, Sharon. Bye, everyone.
I know so people pointed out some indirect communication, passive communication. It's interesting what Elena And that was actually true. This is not scripted. She had a rough weekend and had agreed to come, and then really felt like maybe it's not the best use of time. Elena thought that that was pretty assertive on her part, because she often will tend to communicate in a more passive way. I thought it was a great way of getting her needs met then. And for sure, somebody put in it's relative, right? So parts of it were somewhat passive, parts of it were quite direct. But what I would say is it was a really clear ask. And I think that's one of the really key things there. All right, so let's keep going.
We were going to run the virtual summer from early June to early August. But after some discussions, we've decided to run it all the way through August. So I'm going to need someone to coordinate that block.
Do you mean you need someone to coordinate the entire block?
I'm asking for somebody to coordinate the entire block. And if there's just one person, it's going to be a lot easier and smoother.
I already have a vacation planned.
Well, then, Victor, maybe we'll just have you do it. Or Kristen, can either of you do it?
I would be willing to, but I think that's too much work for one person.
Is there a way to divide responsibilities a little bit? I also have a vacation plan, but just one of those weeks. So if our vacations are staggered, is there a way that not one person could do the whole block, but we could divide responsibilities a little bit?
You know, this really matters. And I this is our second virtual summer, and it has to go really, really well. It just has to go well.
Sharon, I would love to help you, but I'm also over obligated for August. I have a lot on my plate, and I'm not sure if one person taking this on will bring everything, 100%. So like Kristen said, can we all kind of pull it together?
I was going to say that I can do it. If you really need someone and it has to be one person, I have a lot of work. And I have a baby and all of that, but I can do it. I can do it myself. Yes.
I think
so. Lots of right here is just a string of interdependent, right? Anna in volunteering to do it really showed her interdependent lens, right? Somebody put it as take one for the team. That might be a nice other way when you think of interdependent. It's a willingness to take one for the team. Now, there was a lot of people commenting on the empathic listening, the questions, right? The clarifying questions, the effort to come up with a creative solution. So you picked up on a lot of things. I also noted many of you picked up that I'm a boss with a pretty direct communication style, right? And somebody just picked up on that. What about Sharon's style of how she's asking, right? So here's a group of people dealing with a boss who has a pretty clear style. Let's keep seeing what happens. So Anna just volunteered, all right, and let's see what happens after that.
From all of you is that maybe I'm being unrealistic. So I don't understand what the hesitation is about.
It just seems like a lot for one person to do, especially after having the full summer.
Yeah, and so, I think typically we end around the same time. And so I think several of us have vacation scheduled that got canceled last summer. And so again, I'm happy to help. I'm happy to provide support to whomever this lead person is. But that 1 week in August, I would really like to make sure that I have a little bit of a break.
Is it possible for us to all work together so that we're responsible for each week? It looks like we all have vacations planned. So, we have each week a person takes the lead.
Anna, would you be willing to be the coordinator of the people each week?
Yes, I can do anything you need me to. Yes.
Uh-huh.
And I can coordinate the team.
Okay. So then if I'm hearing all of you correctly, you're in, but you're concerned about that, the fact that you have things planned, we already have a busy summer, and you'd like to break it up with a lead each week. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
That
I
would be
feel like-
really helpful.
Yeah, and I feel like for me, that would help me. I'm happy to help with the month, but if I could go and do my vacation, that would really just help me and my family at the end of the summer as well.
I'm agreeable that Anna can coordinate some things, but Kristen, you play a really important role in the high school program, and I would appreciate if you would be available that entire time.
I hear what you're saying, but you know, my family and my kids are really important, and so yeah. Let me think about this, but I do hear you.
So I want to pause right there for a moment, and somebody accurately says, Kristen asked for time, right? Interestingly, I had, we didn't plan this very much. I just said, we're going to do some improv. Here's the situation. And we got started. But I paused right before that. And I said, Kristen, I'm going to push you on not taking your vacation, and you're going to broken record till I give in. And she couldn't do it. Even though we were role playing, it was hard. And so she did sort of her go-to skill when you're in a negotiation and you get stuck is, yeah, I'm going to think about it. Right. So it was a really good use of time. And then there's some comments about my style. I have a pretty direct and I think sometimes can seem aggressive to people's style. And I wanted to play something that, play that up a little bit in hearing some, but also pushing some, because I wanted to give you something where you didn't say, oh, well, my boss is way different, more difficult, etc. There is a comment here about my PI has a similar communication style like Sharon's, and we have this feeling that we'll irk him, right? Maybe it's not true. I mean, that's a really, really important thing, right? So you need to get to know your boss's style. And I think people in my group, even though this is a role play, they know that I have a direct style. I will really put things out on the table and push, but that if they set a boundary, that I'll regroup and hear them. And I think many bosses are like that. It doesn't mean it always feels good. And that's the thing where discomfort tolerance comes into play. Let's see a little bit more. And somebody pointed out this is a group situation. I agree. I just wanted you to see multiple people's styles and authentically, not asking them to fake a style that's not theirs. But for sure, to be assertive in a group situation like this is even harder. Good point.
Kristen, if you can do it, I can do it for you.
I get a sense, Anna, that you're offering, but maybe it's not optimal, or are you really excited to be doing this?
I can make it work.
I realize the importance of this, and I can take over Kristen so that she can have her vacation. However, I have never done the type of work that Kristen has done. So I may need maybe a little bit of training on her responsibilities.
That's sort of a win-win. You get to learn from Kristen, right? Who's an expert.
It's only really 1 week that I'll be gone. And so I'd be happy to provide support and before and after my vacation and make sure Victor is really set up during that 1 week to really be successful.
Okay. All right. I'll get back to you all. We'll meet.
So that's the end of our meeting. And then you're going to see a meeting after I left. People pointed out that Anna was compromising, and in many ways, I think even using an accommodating style, and then pointed out that there was some collaborative style going on, right? This whole idea, well, I'll Victor saying, I'll do it for you, Kristen, but you'll teach me, right? A win-win. All right, now let's see what happens when I left.
Okay, I'm really worried. This is gonna be a lot of work, and I'm not sure exactly how I'm gonna do it. But
Look, if you didn't want to do it, you shouldn't have volunteered. You kind of put us all in a bad spot here.
Actually, Victor, I didn't hear you talk about a vacation, so it seems like you don't have a plan. So why don't you just take over the project?
I do have a plan, and I, in the end, decided, hey, you know what, I can help because it's too much on Anna.
I think we're all just really stressed about this, just hearing this for the first time. So instead of maybe saying things we don't want to say to each other, why don't we just like walk away from this for a little while, take some time to think about it, regroup, and see what we can come up with. I'm sure that we can get this done if we just have some time to think about it.
Great. All right. So I'm going to move
I'm sorry
on.
to have
Oop,
called this meeting.
this is so not my best skill set. All right. So any last minute thoughts about watching that? Somebody put into the chat, here's hierarchy. The boss feels they have the right to make demands that are likely to make employees uncomfortable and subservient, needing to please the boss rather than collaborative teamwork. All of the team sounds apologetic and defensive constantly to my ear. I don't know if that's true for everyone, whether it all felt that way to everyone. I did, without a doubt, want to play a role where I didn't go in and say, so we have this challenge, how are we going to solve it? Because a lot of times we find ourselves on the receiving end of a boss who has an idea of how to move forward. And so we have to find space to get our ideas in there. It's interesting, then somebody says, I think they sounded uncomfortably assertive, maybe not used to it or nervous about being assertive. When you are talking to your boss and you're assertive, it might come off seeming a little bit uncomfortable or nervous. And I think that's a really key point. That's discomfort tolerance, to go ahead and do it anyway. And while there were some parts of this that would probably were a little bit out of character of some of the people, this level of being assertive was something that many of them do. But also the interdependent, the accommodation, we see all of that as well. And so in many ways, what we saw was a mix of people, using some of the strengths of their communication style. I think Anna could have said no to taking on the entire project. Yes, I think that everyone in the office would agree. And in fact, if we had a month to add to the summer, we would break it up and probably into teams of people, which is how our summer program is run, is by a set of teams. So anyway, we thought this might be interesting for you to have a chance to look and watch and to see what you think, what you can recognize, and what you would like to learn yourself. So I want to wrap up. I'll take some Q&A for a little bit. We have a few minutes left. And so let me start at the beginning. So are there positive impacts of interdependent and negative aspects of independent? There are positive and negative of both. So interdependent individuals bring a great team dynamic, concern for others, respect for community. So there's tremendous strengths there. When you think of the liabilities of interdependent, it's probably like Anna, who didn't get her needs met and just agreed to do a month of work. So I wonder if it can be very, very exhausting, that interdependent approach. Independent strength is clear asks, right? Clear communication. In many ways, maybe people who achieve their goals, and then if they can achieve big goals, they can be helpful to others. So there's some strength there. Liabilities of independent style can seem selfish. It can seem overly focused on yourself. So strengths in both, liabilities in both. In your example sessions, I noticed you didn't use words like sorry or please. It's interesting. I don't think that there is a reason. I'll have to go back and look. There should have been probably some pleases. I think my goal was to really model assertive behavior, and perhaps in trying to do that, I missed the general courtesy of a please. For the most part, the examples I gave, I'm not sure required a sorry. I think that there is something about over apologizing that can get in the way for people in the workplace. And so I tend to be concerned about apologizing too much, and I probably overcorrected in that case. What's the difference between self-advocacy and selfishness? In one situation, you can't really answer that. People who advocate for themselves effectively and who are not selfish also advocate for others. They don't advocate for themselves at the expense of others. And so they have a general sense of the perspective. Selfish people only look at their own needs and they never consider the community needs. So, there were comments earlier about it's relative. That's the way to think about that. Somebody put in the AAMC Great Group Compact. That's some rights and responsibilities. It's a really great document. Thank you. There's a discussion about a combo of direct and indirect communication, and that is true. Sometimes we mix them. I'd really like to take a vacation, and I'm wondering whether the first 2 weeks of July or the last 2 weeks of July are okay. There's a little bit of a asking there. It's still a pretty direct way of saying, right, I want to know whether these are okay, but that's an example that came to mind. Can you switch between the interdependent and dependent system depending on your roles and surroundings? Yes. As soon as we bring awareness to something, we have the ability to use the information and the awareness about ourselves in different ways, right? And so the more you're aware of which lens you tend to see the world, and the more you look at its strengths and its liabilities, and you really sit with that fact that this is an inherent part of who you are, and it works for you some of the time, and you embrace it some of the time, and it doesn't work for you some of the time, and you'd like to soften it then. The more you do that, the easier it is to access the other view. And next week we're going to talk about communication styles, and it's the same. And in terms of those conflict styles, it's the same. You might have your go-to style you tend to do, but now that you're aware of it and you decide, oh, I want to try that creative problem solving, or I want to try being, not always being accommodating. The more awareness we have about our style, the more we can develop sort of additional styles that start to feel comfortable. When saying I feel, aren't you exposing your weaknesses and telling people how to hurt you? It's interesting because at work sometimes with the career staff, we talk about assertive communication and people say it's work. And so sometimes I feel hurt isn't relevant. So you might decide at times not to share what you feel. But the honest truth is that a lot of times what people see is our behavior. They don't see what we feel underneath. And because they don't see that, they can't interpret accurately. And so again, I think it's context specific, and you need to know the person that you are dealing with. But some discussion about how you feel can be very, very appropriate. For some reason, we really fear emotions in the workplace. And I think that's really unfortunate. What if we find that it's hard to be assertive due to learned behaviors from times we've faced social backlash, bias from our peers? It can be another situation, but without a doubt, identity comes into play here. We have a tendency to take the learning from one situation and apply it to the other. And in some ways, that's a strength, right? We want to learn from what happened. But sometimes that becomes what is known in the literature as an assumed constraint. I was assertive and it didn't work in this situation, so it won't work in the next one, right? Remember, we talked about some cognitive distortions around that concept. So I think you want to say, is it an N of one? I'm a scientist. N's of one aren't helpful. Is it a lot, but with one person. And when I've discussed this with other trusted mentors and confidants and peers, they've assured me otherwise, right? Then you want to try to let go of the learning, right? Everything is a question of, is this helping me or hurting me? So if it didn't go well to be assertive one time with your PI, so you've learned never to be assertive with your PI, well, there's a lesson that's hurting you, right? And so it's really key to ask yourself, is this helping or hurting? Works, grants, deadlines, they're good excuses. What do you do when you need to set a boundary for yourself? I need time for myself. You have no excuse. You know, the honest truth is you don't really have to give an excuse. I'm sorry, my plate is full and I can't do that right now. I'm sorry, there's a lot going on in my personal life and I can't do that right now. You don't have to have, you know, it's not actually good excuse, bad excuse. Needing to take care of yourself is a really good excuse. To do well, we have to be well. To treat others well, we have to be well ourselves. Two really good excuses for setting boundaries to take care of yourself. How do you share issues like sleep impact or health issues you're currently dealing with without making excuses for lack of work or results? So the word excuses comes negative. I like explanation. I think if you're not feeling well, it is an explanation for lack of productivity. And so if you totally dismissed it and didn't have any concern about the work, maybe that isn't comfortable. But to say, I want to be able to do more and I'm trying my best, but I'm dealing with these things, that's not an excuse, that's an explanation. Now, I hope that you work with individuals who see it as such and are respectful of that. And I think that's the part of this that's so hard for me, is I feel like we can teach all of you great skills. You already have lots of good skills. I can see that from the things you share in the chat. But you still work in an environment that needs to change itself. Cultural change needs to happen.